Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome at the meeting with Mr. Witold Szabłowski. Cuisine or Kitchen of Dictators is the working title. Our guest needs no introduction, so the only thing that we need to do are the formalities. Witold Szabłowski is a columnist and famous for many books. He's written The Assassin from Morelli City, How to Feed a Dictator, Kitchen Side of Russia. So these books will be discussed. And my name is Tomasz Walczak. I appear in Super Express on a daily basis, and I'll be the moderator of this meeting. And let's hope that we will look at what is happening here. We want to talk about war with Witold. We need to bring together all the elements, the dictator's kitchen, the war. I need some comment. Russia, that informs that it decolonizes the world in the 21st century, is more than eager to forget that it was the colonial empire. Yeah, it has been and still is. And kitchen is the place, is the best to see when you see a plethora of different dishes they have incorporated, like pilmeni when they colonized Georgia, North Caucasia that was colonized in the 19th century, or beetroots, or chebureks that meant fast food in ex-Soviet Union. This is Crimea cuisine. So every empire, wherever they went, not only did they steal but also colonized. Good morning. I am very happy that you've come here. Thanks for coming here, because this is the hour. Not only is this early, but there are also 4 stages. It's nice to see you. I stopped when you said Russia was. Russia still is the last colonial empire. My heart is trembling, but what we are looking at is whether the last empire that is ready to conquer and send the people from Caucasia and Siberia and local peoples, will it fall to crumble, or will we have to wait? For some time I have believed that Russia is going to collapse and crumble, and this process has accelerated. All the cracks and all the tendencies will only deepen now. Will it happen now, or will they be able to sustain it with the power of special forces? Because in my opinion, it's sufficient to take one building block from this and it will collapse. What is most symptomatic with regards to Russia is Cheburek's story. The Tatars that were supposed to be ruled out of history, deported from Crimea just in a few days. They were sent to Uzbekistan or Siberia. In Crimea, Tatars brought in the Chebureks to a great extent. They proliferated throughout the Soviet Union. It's easy to make, it's a nice snack, it's nourishing. And the authorities disliked it, and there was the top policy. People can eat it, but you cannot call it chebureki. You couldn't write chebureki on the banner. You might have been fined with administrative fines. They were supposed to be called southern fillings, southern dumplings. You might have heard it that Russians believe that one of the fronts of this Ukraine is the war for borscht. Is this Russian or Ukrainian? Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs issued out absurd ideas They are so awful, these Ukrainians. They wanted to appropriate Polish. And the Polish battle has continued since 19th century. There was the Tsar censorship in cookbooks printed in Polish Kingdom, forbade to write about Ukrainian borscht. It was small Russia's borscht, exactly the same borscht, the same recipe, but a different name. So this is colonial kind of thinking, but the kitchen side. In the context of empires and colonialism, the kitchen has got this military aspect. We know Russian approval and supplies for the army led to a disaster. We remember the new phase of the conflict, where the food portions well past best before date, like 50 years. I've got a friend who fought in Afghanistan, and he used to eat condensed milk because that was the only thing they were able to supply. We remember Russian army starving after the First World War. Not only is this colonial, but also political and military. I wrote a book, The Kitchen Side of Russia. It's 100 years of Russia and Soviet Union, and how Russia develops its empire, how they manage the empire, but it's told from the point of view of cooks. Short introduction, but I'm going to return to this. The book starts with the last cook of Tsar, because he was shot down and buried with the Tsar. So when the Tsar family was exhumated in 1990s, the Tsar was dropped on to the cook and the bones mixed, and the best anthropologists are unable to say which bone is whose, so they chucked it all into one coffin, and Tsar's bones are mixed with the bones of the cook, and this is how the book is constructed. There is the Tsarist kitchen, Lenin, Stalin's kitchen, first secretary's kitchen, the war kitchen, and space kitchen. I had the feeling that Soviet Union, when sent people to death, they tried to feed them, because cooking is a kind of motherhood. It's a prolongation of relations with your mother. I had a feeling when I was talking to cooks from Chernobyl, and they used to say that Chernobyl was a wonderful place, culinary-wise, because probably it was the only Soviet Union's place with abundance of food of good quality. What is, in my opinion, pretty new in this war is the fact that they send them to death, empty-stomached. So Putin disrespects his soldiers so much that he treats them like war meat that is supposed to shout out "Hurrah!" and go to die, that the food portionings are 30 or even 40, in extreme cases 50 years past sell-by date. So it shows profound deterioration of Russian authorities. So is this lack of respect, or is this the demonstration of what Russia is like as the country unable to provide food? The food might have been stolen somewhere on the way. Food portions are that old. The newest ones were distributed among friends, and somebody put up a summer house dacha in the Crimea for the money they appropriated. This country is corruption destroyed. They steal, and it shows their attitude to their citizens. There was the oligarchy created. I've known Soviet Union from stories only, at least the authorities, but still I've got the feeling that oligarchy did not develop that much. They were in contact with the people. They were trying to maintain contacts with the citizens, and this authorities alienated. You are writing about this myth related to Stalin. Vladimir Putin's grandfather was supposed to be the cook. Yeah, it was my disillusionment, because when I started writing the book about Russia, I thought that the punchline would be Putin's grandfather cooking for Stalin. It was in my head. I wrote a book about dictators' cooks, and this is an ideal example. Grandfather is a cook. Who becomes a cook? Who becomes a dictator? It's not a coincidence, because cooks have all these traits to become dictators. So it's just a fickle finger of fate, who becomes whom, a dictator, a cook. And it turned out that Putin's was a cock and bull story. Well, it was not sham that his grandfather was a cook. They enjoyed long-standing traditions of cooking from the Euro region. They came to Petersburg on foot because they were impoverished. It was the beginning of the 20th century, and started working in restaurants, but never did his grandfather cook. Putin said that he cooked for Lenin, Stalin, and he got a gold coin from Rasputin because he cooked something for him. It was all an imaginary story. Well, I stopped you. You finished what I wanted to say. Many people have waited for Vladimir Putin to be removed from Kremlin or to die. We don't know many instances where the heads of the countries were poisoned to death. We know stories from Russia like this. So what's the chance of somebody coming and poisoning Putin? Like every other dictator, do they have people who have those trying food? The chance is near zero. There is no access of this kind to Vladimir Putin. I was reading. Well, I made friends with the guy who was the head of Kremlin's kitchen. We had long sessions. He did some cooking for me. There was some alcohol. He told me how kitchen is organized there. Kremlin's party, there is a civilian who does the cooking. The person you can have an interview with, you know who that person is. His photos are published in the newspapers, but there are 9 people, topmost rulers. They have special forces cooks, 9 of them. Putin, and it was Yeltsin's times, these are special forces officers. They become FSB agents, and when somebody discovers their cooking talents, they're invited to learn at the culinary school, to learn something. So it's not like you just come and do some cooking, or a cook smuggles some poison and administers some drops in order to relieve the world from the problem. 2 Soviet Union rulers finished their lives in very strange circumstances, and the person who allegedly did that was the special forces head, Beria, when Stalin died. And Stalin's death is pretty mysterious. There are many conspiracy theories associated with this, and Brezhnev's death. Little is said about it, but probably it was Andropov who wanted to step in. He couldn't wait. Hardly did Brezhnev was able to live, but he was going by. So we can take down Putin. Every morning I get up for a few months. I've been wondering whether we read the news that Putin choked with chicken's bone, or had food poisoning, or something close to absurdity. The more the oligarchs and the more the mafia world that enjoy the yachts and commodities in Europe, London, that are expensive so much, the more money they burn, the greater the possibility is to get rid of Putin because it pays off. Putin is the face of war. If you want to put an end to the war, you need to get rid of him. Hunger as a killing weapon, as a political tool to subjectivate people. There is a little bit of mess in Russia. You can do many things in that country. But the burial place of Lenin is a temple. You cannot take photos. You cannot wear shorts. You cannot talk too loud. This is the only place where they care about anything. Stalin is next to it, the biggest perpetrator in history. So Russia should undergo decommunization, de-Leninization, de-Putinization, and this is my greatest worry. Isn't that they'll exchange the authorities, but the ball continues. We assume the broader perspective. I'm wondering, you mentioned that collapse of Putin may mean thorough remodeling of Russia. Let me share an anecdote. A friend of mine, a Russian, came to Poland to screen a film about Jaruzelski, and hardly did he understand that we dislike Jaruzelski. Why did we hate him? And he was a liberal from Russia. He explained, we may dislike them, but we respect them. They can live a peaceful life and they make their lives difficult. So if liberal milieus of Russia believe that those who have already took a farewell need respect, hardly can we believe that anything changed. Here, I started by saying that Russia will fall into parts and it will happen during our life. We are going to observe the processes. They'll be hugely interesting. I'll provide descriptions and I cannot wait for this, and I hope that I'll write the last chapter to my cookbook. There'll be the black soup that is lethal, and you'll find the cook, and you'll have the recipe in the latest edition of the book. They are poisonous country. Both Stalin and Brezhnev got something, but Afghanistan intervention started with Karzai, who was a huge supporter of Soviet Union, but they discontinued to like him. They wanted to swap him. He was KGB poison. They changed the cook, and 2 weeks later the cook gave him poison. Little did he eat. He was fasting. So the poison didn't work, and they had to help him with a machine gun. And this is how the intervention started. They do things of this kind. They are used to that.
Perhaps you remember when the first Maidan was approaching, so to say, where Yushchenko was the presidential candidate, and he posed threat to Yanukovych and his team. Well, it was all about the same. These are not just internal conflicts, but colonial ones. Well, I was present at that first Maidan. I could see Yushchenko's face. We saw the toxin pouring out of his face. It was horrifying. Luckily, he survived. But not everybody was so happy. Those targeted by Russian secret services. You also dealt with Middle East. You met numerous dictators, personally just one, but you researched on others. When we observe Vladimir Putin and his war, how come they did not cope with waging war? Obviously, we have a military disaster. Such a weak country as Ukraine seemed, and they are unable to conquer it. But he is a man, a hard ruling man with inefficient army. Well, pretty simple. Dictators will not listen to those who could criticize them. They are truth resilient. There is this famous briefing between Putin and his secret services 2 days before the invasion, when somebody was trying to disagree, perhaps the war was not the best idea. and he simply hammered them down. It's a structure. We know what Putin wants to hear. He wants to hear Ukraine is going to surrender on the third day. Our army is invincible. We have greatest army. And such a structure keeps on going for 20 years. An average employee reports for 20 years from the field to what his boss would like to hear. The boss added some extra, reported to the general. The general added some extra to score some points and reported to Putin. And they would put into those reports whatever they wanted. True bullshit. And Putin must have been convinced that people in Ukraine would welcome the Russian army with flowers. He believed that because that's what the report said. And this is the trap for most of dictators. First of all, they start to think they are geniuses. I'm convinced Ceausescu believed he was one of the most genius people ever born. I believe Idi Amin believed he had an army to conquer Tanzania. 4 days after he did it, he ceased to be the president. So when they are surrounded by blind supporters, by people who would only applaud whatever they say, it's like whatever they say, the dictator says, it's like gold idea to be printed and posted on buildings. They are out without touch with reality. Well, on the other hand, we have a democratic state, Ukraine, where, first of all, they managed to separate politicians from commanders, and it looks different. It's like hope. We are at the freedom game, and I think that in the world where dictators are pushing around and democracy is slowly dying out, all of a sudden it turns out that democracy is one of the most resilient systems to run war. Well, I wish you were right. I'm not. I'm a fan of Ukrainian armed forces, what they show in the war, but I don't believe that comes from democracy. I believe it's more due to Russian weakness. It's a corroded country. It's not just the 20 years of Putin's rule, but Russian historically has reached a point where its imperial colonial policy won't make it any longer. You can't build a country like that in the 21st century. Well, I wish you were right. Well, let's stick to my optimism. Well, cuisine. In the beginning of war, Western companies started to leave Russia, McDonald's included, and McDonald's, very proud of their cuisine tradition, their general independence, and it turns out they couldn't live without McDonald's. You can remember those long lines waiting to get in final McDonald's. And then there was Dziadzia Bania. Initially, they had different name. It was Dziadzia Vania, but there was a network named Mikoyan, which is a great joke. They are such a funny nation. Naming a food network Mikoyan. Mikoyan means for Russians a guy who built in food industry, meat factories, but Russians do not know. There are Mikoyan cutlets, meatballs that were supposed to look identical throughout Russia. But they don't know that they were created in a way that Anastas Mikoyan, he was a friend of Stalin's, one of the men who stayed at power in the Soviet Union. He was not removed by any eradications by Stalin. Anyway, Mikoyan in 1930s, when the Soviet Union was in good relations with the United States, went to the US, spent there 2 months, watched different food manufacturing facilities. He was delighted. And he, well, I'm losing the language, he proposed Stalin that the Soviet Union should also start making hamburgers. It's great food. You feel well fed. It's a roll, a piece of meat for a worker. Excellent food. The Stalin said, excellent idea. And they decided to produce hamburgers. In the other one, they would produce rolls. And it was such a state that they couldn't coordinate the two factories. They were unable to make one factory produce rolls, the other one hamburgers, and they meet together and produce one food product. That was beyond them. That's how those Mikoyan meat was created. That was for final hamburgers. Mikoyan burgers were created, and in that way, Mikoyan became the burger man. Nobody thought when naming this network Mikoyan that was a reference to the history when burgers failed, in fact. They have it. They joke without knowing they are. The fast food story shows that Russians love Western stuff. They can't live without it. Food, in particular, not just Russians. Saddam Hussein, when he was about to die, his final meal, he ordered a burger. Idi Amin, who also waged war against the West, criticized the West. When he knew it was all over, he would never regain power, he would eat hamburgers. Kim Jong-un. I once spoke to an Italian cook who regularly prepared pizza for Kim Jong-il. He was a fan of pizza and all Western food, imperialistic food. A good pizza is simply a good pizza, and even dictators would understand it. Crisis has arrived to Russia. What is the average food of an average Russian? I don't expect it might be much meat. But what's classical in Russia? Groats, potatoes. In the beginning of war, we heard from Russians, well, the harsh times are coming, we'll eat more potatoes. How do they cope with such crisis? In my opinion, Gubinka, that is the Russian countryside, well, it's strength of Russia. In fact, the life of those people has not changed. They have always lived poorly. They are people who need to explore their small plot of land to survive. And they are accustomed to make the ends meet, to have enough food for winter. They have to rely on land, forest, mushroom, berries, whatever they grow on their own. And from their perspective, it hasn't changed. Groats is still cheap, flour is available. Whatever they cannot make on their own can be purchased. If they want to add something to that groats, they can arrange it from their own plot of land. It's not by incident that many Russians have a dacha, that is the summer houses. It's not just a plot of land. The richer would go just to relax, to rest. It's just a leisure house. But for many people, the dacha is a method to provide food. And even the communists observe that it's good if people have some land because they can cope. And later on, Putin is exploring that idea. So I believe that the average Russian's cuisine has not changed much. But not because it's so very good, but it's because it has never been very good. It must have changed for the middle class. Those who had something before the war are now those who are having still less and less and feel the crisis in their wallets, pockets, plates. I remember Svetlana Alisievich's book, Second-Hand Times, and she tells stories about people who defended Yeltsin during Yanayev coup, and somebody screams, "Come, protest, there will be no sausage, there will be no books." Well, there is a moment, there are no books, they are still more and more difficult to get, a book critical against Putin, but what's the middle class? The urban middle class suffer from shortage of sausage and face the nightmares of the Soviet Union. That may happen. The question is what they will do about it. I believe Russians, as far as the Tsar's time ago, they've been accustomed to this famous saying, the quieter you go, the further you reach. Do not protest, do not show your opinions. There may be no sausage, but it will come. I don't know what comes out of that. I don't believe the middle class is strong enough that they could do something. I believe they will feel it. We spoke about Belarus before we started talking here. When I went to Belarus, I felt that was a model dictatorship of the 21st century, because people in Belarus had everything people in Europe have. I don't know how to name it, a Silicon Valley in Belarus. There were whole companies that built startups. There were people who made several $1,000s a month. Myriads of such people, well-educated IT specialists, and they lived like we in Europe. They would eat in good restaurants in Minsk. They would fly on holiday to Egypt, Thailand, Greece, wherever European people would go. If they wanted, they could fly to Paris, Italy, London, Warsaw. They had their Netflix. They had soy latte. Their life was no different than the life of middle-class people in other countries. The only thing that was different, they couldn't oppose the authority. And that's all. And for a long time, I had that feeling that would be the image of dictatorship of the 21st century. You've got what you want. No Big Brother, no Orwell. Nobody is interested in what you discuss at home with your family. Nobody cares about your opinion. Just do not interfere. And Belarus surprised me. 2 years ago, the protests, I believe Belarusians were surprised by the protest, how far the dictatorships made them tired, how far they were fed up with their president. I believe in Russia something similar may happen. However, it won't originate from the middle class. I trust it would go into regions that would start to separate. So, not economic problems, not food problems, but the mobilizations made the war painful for people, that made them flee Russia. They started to run through Georgia. It was like a trigger. Well, on my Facebook, in my reporter's journal that I've been running all the war, I wrote, I do not trust 80% support for war in Russia. I believe Russians, to a major extent, believe it's in Ukraine. If somebody lives in Siberia, Ukraine is far, far away. But their attitude to what, just before the mobilization was announced, there were minor mobilizations in regions where people were strongly persuaded to join the armed forces. All the republics, like Yakutia, declared they would send 30,000 volunteers. 80 arrived. And there were those sad pictures where those 80 candidates, that was not the best decision in their lives. So you see those 80 guys standing. You must say they were not the smartest in the village. You could see the faces. But they started to understand something was wrong, and they were standing in some rubber boots, boarded on a Russian time bus, and they go to fight Ukraine. It looks like Yaroslav Hasik's Schweik. From the very beginning, I saw the war committees burning. Do you know what's the everyday name? The official name is Wojenkomat, and the common name is meat machine. They know this is just sending people like cannon meat, And that is the true support for war. Not that if they ask me in a survey, somebody phone me and I say on the phone, yes, I support President Putin and his special operation in Ukraine. The true support is in how many people are ready to go to war. And they have shown that. That is the true support, or lack of it. I believe that Putin, like Freud's, I believe that his major error is that in the 21st century you can wage wars like Stalin ran World War II, and this is his first basic error. The second error is he believed he could fight Ukraine like he did in Syria. You can simply bomb people with artillery, bullets, and they will not react. The Syrians were unable. The Ukrainians are. They, supported by NATO, they can push them up to Ural. This is the authors' meeting. There are your readers, so I would like to hand over to them. We still have a couple of minutes to ask questions. I believe there is somebody with a microphone. Raise your hands if you want to ask a question. You'll be provided a microphone. There is a first speaker at the back. Good morning. I've been thinking, I read about Russia pretty much, especially recently, considering the Ukrainian conflict. I'm trying to understand the Russians' awareness or lack of awareness. What wonders me is why they cannot, mind you, they travel around Europe and the world. When they get back to their hometowns, wherever it is in Russia, they don't think like we used to think, that the West is so good and we got it so bad. But the most changes that happened in Central Europe began because we went one day to Paris, Amsterdam, London. We got back to our Łódź, Warsaw, Kraków, and we wanted the same. It all initiated all the changes, our joining the EU. Why? They come back from Sicily, Egypt, back to, let's say, Novosibirsk, and why they do not think, why can't we have it? I believe they do think so. Ukrainians had a meme recently that presented Iranian women protesting. The question was, why Russian men cannot be so courageous as the Iranian women? Well, frankly speaking, I have no good answer to that question. But what I know is that there is silent protest going on. All the hackers group, half of the anonymous attacks from the beginning of the war against important Russian sites and networks, half made by Russians themselves. It is said that lots of sabotage of burning military commissions, burning companies, factories that produce for the military, that may be moderated by the Ukrainians, but they can be also done by Russians themselves. So resistance is building up slowly. But even the Iranian women took time to reach that critical point. I believe it's still ahead of us. I trust, I hope. I've got plenty of friends in Russia, people I value and appreciate, who are fully against Putin. I trust they will act.
Thank you very much for this question. Who's next? There's a lady sitting in the back. My question pertains to the role of Turkey. It's very interesting because Turkey is dictator managed and it's kind of intermediary in peaceful debate on the war, trying to whitewash it. They send drones to Ukraine and at the same time they keep talking to Putin, keep trading with Putin. So Erdogan's role, how do you see it? Who's been trying to show himself as the one sitting on the fence. Erdogan is the only dictator I met in person. I had the dinner with Erdogan. It was President Duda and Erdogan. Yeah, there was an episode in my life. I was a guest after the Turkey's turmoil. I told about it in every television set. I thought they would never invite me, but the embassy invited me for lunch or dinner. Yeah, he plays to gain as much for Putin. I like Erdogan paying off for the years. He did it again when he did it to Putin, when he was waiting for him to appear. He was like pupil at school, waiting for the mistress to bring in the notes and say, yes, everybody does that for Putin. They humiliate him. They want to gain. Erdogan wants to gain for Turkey as much as possible. They earn a lot of money. Russians go on holidays. So Erdogan wants to get as much as possible. Erdogan is businesslike for everything, and the war is the same. 2 minutes left, and quick question and quick answer before we are chased away from here. Second question from you, referring to what you said. I'm half Turkish. I know what is the situation associated with high inflation, and I can see how he wants to play it international, showing that international media write about Erdogan, and he wants to show this positive image. Do you think this kind of alarming inflation and management crisis, do you think Erdogan is able to use this international prestige to build something for himself in Turkey? For many years, well, you know it better than me, Erdogan's power was not that he was an outstanding politician, but CHP were lazy bones. So losing against them, you'd have to try hard. There were always candidates. 40 seconds. You want to sum up? Well, 10 seconds. It was difficult to lose against them. He wins the next election. It's not that he's outstanding, he's coping so well, but there was no serious opponent that appeared. Thank you very much, and time for further off-stage discussions. Witek will be at your disposal. Thank you very much. Kitchen and politics create an explosive mixture. It's nice to have you here to discuss it. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.